All right, we're back. Rob Ellis, Derek Gunn, Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network, talking Eagles as we're getting you set. It's finally game week. No more preseason games to talk about. No more what ifs. We know what it is. Yes, it's a beautiful thing, man. It is a beautiful thing. All right, so I guess this isn't surprising. Nick Sirianni declined to name a starter next to Reed Blankenship. Can't say I'm surprised by that. Wants to keep the Patriots guessing, I guess, Derek. If you had to guess who it would be, who would be the opposite safety? I think it's still going to be Terrell Edmonds early. I think eventually we're going to see some changes there. But who do you think?
Well, he's a 6-year vet, so that would be my odds-on choice is to pick him. You know, you need a stabilizing force in the back of that defense. And, you know, let's face it, he's been around the block a few times. He reads the defense well. You need somebody, and not to say Sidney Brown isn't coming, because he's coming. But for now, to get this thing off the ground, especially when you have so many components, so many new components to what you're going to do on that side of the ball. Mm-hmm. You want as much veteran presence on that side as you can possibly get. And I think it'll start up with Edmonds, no question about it.
Yeah. But look, I feel pretty good about Blankenship. I know there's still a lot of question marks out there, but you know, by all accounts, he had a really good camp. You know, and we didn't get to see him a ton. I think he played in the one game, was it Cleveland or whatever, but we didn't see him a lot in the preseason. But that's fine. Either way, not a big deal as far as I'm concerned. All right, so let's talk about some of the big things that happened this offseason, Gunner. Let's start with the two biggest storylines in my estimation. Two new coordinators. You know, a lot of times you'll lose one here and there, either side of the ball, but to lose both is a lot. Jonathan Gannon goes to Arizona. Shane Steichen goes to Indianapolis. So let's begin there. No matter what, even with Brian Johnson being in-house and Sean Desai coming from outside of the organization, there is still an adjustment period. Where would you put that on a concern level for you? Is that a biggie to you, or is it one that I don't think it'll take these guys all that long because they still have a lot of talent?
See, it's not a major concern twofold. Number one, because the offense itself is intact. Everybody in that offense except the right guard, you know, and even if it's Jurgens, he's been there. Yeah. So he's been among them. You know, that thing is intact. It's not often you get a team that went to the Super Bowl that gets its entire offense back. Yeah, they lost Malo. Okay, I get that. But you're plugging in a guy waiting in the wings who's been there already. When you look at the offensive coordinator, as I just mentioned before the break, he's been with them from the start. He thinks like them. And I'm sure he hasn't gotten enough credit in the past for things he might have seen that they may have implemented into this offense to make it as lethal as it was. Now he steps to the forefront. He's the center stage now. Sirianni has told us way back in the spring, he will call the plays. So the onus is on him now. And for Sirianni to do that back in the spring tells me he has the utmost confidence in Brian Johnson. And, of course, we've heard across the league that he's going to be a head coach sooner rather than later in the National Football League. So all those things combined tell me this thing is going to be smooth sailing. And then, of course, Sirianni is a godfather of the playbook, and if he sees something wrong, he'll pump the brakes on it. You know, we may never know it, but he may pump the brakes, getting Johnson's there. Hey, look, when you see this formation, go here instead of going here. Those are little things we may not even know about.
Right.
But he's going to let Brian Johnson grow in his offense, not just because he's been here, but because he knows that he's opening a door possibly for Johnson at the end of the season.
Yeah, and Nick's always said, even when Shane Steichen was here, hey, I'll jump in. Like, I see something I like here, I'm gonna make a suggestion and say, hey, we gotta go with that. So that wouldn't be new, right? So that part is not a reflection of Brian Johnson at all. Nick always has reserved that right to be able to do that.
Right.
I think there is a great advantage from Brian Johnson's standpoint to being in-house. I'll draw a comparison to baseball for a minute. When Rob Thompson took over for Joe Girardi, I think we all thought he was just going to be a clone of Joe Girardi, right? Yep. And he's just going to do the same thing. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting that Thompson said was he said, look, you take the good, you take the bad, or you take the things that you think work for you and the things that you necessarily don't think will work for you or the team, and you incorporate that. And that's one of the things that he's done with the Phillies. I think Brian Johnson will be the same way. Look, to some extent, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it.
Right.
What you have with Jalen Hurts in this offense is pretty darn good. So I don't think he is his ego is such that he's going to need to do everything so different just to put his stamp on it and say, this is Brian Johnson's offense.
Right.
But I think he will look at things and say, hey, we could probably do this a little bit more efficiently, or this works better for Jalen. Or now that we have DeAndre Swift, we're going to incorporate screens or passes to the backs. And I think for all those reasons, you could see a new and improved offense. And I really like Shane Steichen. It's no knock on him. But I think this offense has the potential because guys are getting better. Jalen Hurts is getting better. A.J. Brown's getting better. Devontae Smith is getting better. Dallas Goedert's getting better. There's no reason to believe that we've seen the peak of this thing. I think it's still growing. I really do.
I still remember earlier this year when Sirianni said we've only seen half the playbook.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you only had half the playbook and you blew teams away with only half the playbook? Now, I can't wait to see what the other half looks like.
Right.
How much more diversified? How much more deceptive can this offense look? How much more efficient can it look? I mean, let's face it. They're deeper at running back than they were last year. Yes, they had a 1,200-yard rusher last year, but they're deeper and more versatile at the running back position. Mm-hmm. And that's why I believe you will not have a 1,000-yard rusher. I've firmly said this, and I believe they'll be one of the top 4 or 5 rushing teams in the league, but you won't have a 1,000-yard rusher because at any given moment, you can bring a different type of back in the game. One's more of a pass catcher than a runner. One's a better blocker. One's a better between the tackle. Down in distance will decide who's in the game, and, of course, if they have a hot hand. Mm-hmm. So, with everything coming back the way it is, including a new offensive coordinator, I would be shocked if the offense isn't similar to what we saw. Now, granted, you've got to play better teams, and you may have to score more points to beat some of these teams.
Yeah.
But I still say in terms of overall numbers, statistics, where they stand among the rest of the offenses in the National Football League, I'd be shocked if they weren't very similar to what we saw.
Well, what's interesting with their stats? I think what their stats are going to look like, you could have guys with way better individual numbers if they weren't on such a complete team. Sure. A.J. Brown could have been over 1,500 yards, could have had 15 touchdowns.
Devontae Smith, Tennessee. Yeah.
Yeah. Devontae could have had better numbers than he had last year, but he's got A.J. Brown lining up, on the other side of him. He's got Dallas Goedert. I agree with you. I don't think any of the running backs are going to have monster individual rushing numbers, but I think collectively you're going to see a bunch of guys. Like you could see Penny, Swift over 500. You could see Gainwell maybe in that 400 range. Gainwell and Swift with a bunch of catches on top of it and receiving yards, like all those kind of things. I think, Derek, this team averaged about 28 per game last year. I don't see any reason why that can't get up a point or two.
No, I don't either.
No reason.
I don't either. Now, granted, they're going to have to work harder to get it.
Yeah.
Because you've got offenses that are going to be on the field a lot longer than you want them to be on the field. The Kansas Cities, the Buffaloes. They know how to work the clock. Those teams, those offenses are very efficient at working the clock and being diversified also.
Yep.
So you may have to put up a few more points as your defense evolves. You may have to win more low-scoring games for that matter.
Yeah.
We keep talking about them putting up more points, but they can be efficient also and win more low-scoring games because it's so balanced in terms of ball control time. There's so many different scenarios with this team now, with what they're going to face this year, but they can still be just as good. Their numbers can suffer a little bit and still be just as good as they were last year as an overall unit.
I agree. Well, all right, let's go to the other side. So it's a little bit more of an unknown with Desai. We know he comes from Vic Fangio. That was also sort of the school that Gannon came from. We know the organization is big on not giving up the big play. That's their philosophy. Keep it in front of you. You give a field goal, so what? You can live on a field goal. So that's been their philosophy, which means they're not going to be an uber aggressive Wink Martindale, Jim Johnson kind of defense. Okay, we know that much, but we also know this guy's going to put his own twist and turns on it. Like I heard Brandon Graham talking this morning, and he kept mentioning how it was James Bradbury, excuse me, talking about how smart this guy is. They're impressed with just how smart. And we know the guy's got like 18 degrees. He's a doctor, et cetera.
Right.
So what are the touches he's going to put on? He's got more of a challenge in front of him, let's face it, than Brian Johnson does, because he's going to be counting on Nakobe Dean, on Reed Blankenship, on Jalen Carter, on Nolan Smith, on Jordan Davis. Young guys. And they lost some firepower. You lost your leading interception man with CJ GJ. Hargrave, who we talked about earlier with 11 sacks. You lost some things over there. his job's a little bit harder. Do you feel as confident that that defense is going to be where it was last year, like the offense was?
Wow. I think it's unfair to say the word confidence because, and this is not a knock against Sean Desai, and it's unfair to say this, but it's true. He wasn't their first choice. He wasn't their second choice based on everything we heard in terms of who the Eagles were going after as a defensive coordinator. So he was like their third choice. But, that's not fair to say that he can't succeed. He had 1 year as a DC in Chicago. Then he went and became an assistant in Seattle. I have no idea what a Sean Desai defense is going to look like or supposed to look like. And you're right. When you're that first-year guy and you've got a bunch of new coaches you're working with as well, and a bunch of new personnel, you're trying to integrate the old with the new. You got the 35-year-old Brandon Graham, the 33-year-old Fletcher Cox. You've still got the guys like Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, who are in their prime. And then you got the two corners who are 30-plus. Yep. But you've got to sprinkle in a lot of guys in the middle, the Jordan Davises and the Kobe Deans, as you said, Blankenship. And even a new guy coming in Terrell Edmonds. Mm-hmm. And you got some kids waiting in the wing like Sidney Brown who are hungry to play as well. So it may take him a little bit longer to get a feel for what he has and how he wants to utilize it. It's unfair, I think, to critique him negatively or positively until we get a good sample of what he is. So I can't use the word confidence or lack of confidence in him because I don't know what we're supposed to be looking at just yet.
Well, yeah. See, I agree with you. I think everything you said is spot on. I think you weigh the talent that's there, and there's talent. It's just going to look a little bit different, the guys who have to get you there, than last year, versus who you're playing. And again, just a reminder, okay, New England, not, the greatest offense in the world, but you get past New England, you have Minnesota, you're going to have to be dealing with Justin Jefferson again and Kirk Cousins, who puts up numbers. Even Tampa with the questions at quarterback, you have two really good receivers, Evans and Godwin that you're dealing with. Washington, who's got McLaurin and a lot of other weapons. The Rams, who, a very smart offensive mind with McVay. Aaron Rodgers the next week, Tua the next week, Dallas 2 weeks after that, Kansas City, Buffalo, San Fran, Dallas again, Seattle, etc. You get where I'm going with this. You're going to be dealing with very talented teams that hurt a lot of teams. Doesn't matter how good you are defensively. So you also have the challenge of not having the easier schedule that you had last year. I think Desai is going to be fine. I do. I want him to put his imprint on this thing. I want him to get creative with this. We know some of the frustrations there were with Jonathan Gannon and either changing things up or at times being a little bit more aggressive. I want to see this from Sean Desai. I think it's big.
Absolutely. He knows he's under the microscope, and I firmly believe that's a big reason why the Eagles brought in Matt Patricia also. Yeah. Just to have a veteran presence, not look over his shoulder, but to compliment him.
Yeah.
I don't want to say he's looking over his shoulder, because that's headline material. But he's here to help maybe help Desai see things he might not see initially. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. Kudos to the organization for identifying that.
Right.
And strengthening that side of the ball as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the multitude of coaches and players that you're trying to integrate together, that just doesn't happen overnight, especially when you consider most of the frontline guys didn't play on defense.
Yep. All right. Let's talk about departures before we get into either who stayed or new faces. So Hargrave, 11 sacks, CJ, GJ. We've referenced both of those guys a couple times. TJ Edwards, who, maybe wasn't the most athletic guy in the world, but a very smart player, very solid player. Omar Epps. Marcus Epps. If they had Omar Epps, I would like that. Marcus Epps, Kaiser White on the defensive side, offensively, Miles Sanders, Isaac Seumalo. So, and I'm missing a few people there, but in your estimation, how big collectively, and are there certain individuals you think they're going to miss more than others?
Well, I think they're going to miss TJ Edwards more so than any other. He was the brain trust of that defense. He wasn't the fastest guy laterally, but he was so smart. And he grew into that position, and there's a reason why he parlayed that into a nice contract for himself going back home to Chicago.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big loss because now you're putting that position in the hands of a young, more athletic guy, but a guy who's got to see it over and over again, down and down, and play. I think offensively, Miles Sanders is a loss, but they'll make up for it with the collection of guys that they have. I don't think Miles Sanders will be as missed as some people may think he will be, because of who they're throwing to out of the backfield, who they're handing the ball off to out of the backfield, who's going to step up in the hole and pick up a blitzer for him. I don't think Boston Scott gets enough credit for his blocking prowess as well. He's a small guy, but man, he is stout.
Yeah.
Gainwell still needs to work on his blocking a little bit, but Gainwell has so many other attributes to contribute. And so that's why I think all the other areas they can make up for. But that one aspect of the middle of the defense, and let's face it, as good as that defense was, what was his biggest weakness?
The run.
The middle of the field and the run.
Yeah.
Are they better in those two areas? Don't know.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna look at anything, it's interesting you went with Edwards even ahead of Hargrave. I think that's interesting, and I don't think it's wrong. I think it's most people are overlooking the contributions of Edwards. I think that in terms of a pass rush with the interior, you're going to have to get it collectively. It's going to have to be a little bit of Carter. It's going to have to be a little bit of Milton Williams. It's going to have to be a little bit of Jordan Davis. Nobody's going to get anywhere near double-digit sacks in my estimation.
Right.
So you're going to have to get it collectively. Fletcher's going to have to be around that 7 range again too. But where I want to see Jordan Davis really take off here is I want to see him be the immovable force when it comes to the other team trying to run the ball up the middle.
Right.
He wasn't there yet last year. So now this year he needs to be there. Jalen Carter can play at the run and the pass, so he should be good against the run also. I want to see this team improve against the run. I think that's critical to their success because teams are going to want to run the ball on the Eagles to keep Jalen Hurts off the field. If you don't think that they're going to follow that Washington game plan that they had last year when they beat the Eagles here in Philadelphia, you're crazy. It's what they used to do to take Peyton Manning. It's what they used to do a lot of the great quarterbacks. Keep them off the field. That's what they're going to look to do.
The reason why I didn't mention Hargrave was because as accomplished of a pass rusher as he was a liability against the run.
Big time.
He wanted no parts of playing the run, and you saw it.
Yep.
So he was basically one-dimensional for this team. Now, kudos to him. He parlayed that into an $84 million contract in San Francisco. And who knows? He may play the run better in San Francisco, but here he did not. And it started to show, down the stretch. But when you talk about just complete player who was the brain trust, the eyes and the ears of that defense, it was TJ Edwards.
Yeah.
There's no question. And players have told me that. Players will admit that Edwards is a big loss. Now, his only deficiency was he was not just a job, he was an adventure when it came to pass coverage.
Yeah.
But he did so many things well for that defense in terms of deciphering offensive alignments, having players move before the snap of the ball, so on and so forth, stepping up in the hole to help stuff to run. His value to this team is immeasurable in a lot of ways, and it's going to be a loss.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, he's not was he the most athletic guy in the world? Nobody knew how to play football. All right, so let's look at the guys who stayed. Now they re-signed. I'm going to put these sort of both in the same category, even though they're different. They re-signed James Bradbury, who I think a lot of us thought he was going to go bye-bye. And then the Slay thing went a little crazy for a minute, but eventually they end up restructuring him. So they bring back both of their starting corners to go with Avonte Maddox. How big is that, and how surprised were you that both guys ended up back here?
Very surprised because I thought Bradbury would take the money and run wherever it was, But as I said this spring and the summer, I'll say it again, maybe the teams that were offering him the big money were teams that were rebuilding, retooling, going younger. And when you've had a taste of that champagne, man, you want another taste. You don't want just a taste, you want a whole glass. And he was smart enough to realize what the Eagles are offering me is good money, may not be the best money, but I'm in a position where I can go back and probably, hopefully change history in terms of getting that ring. Every player wants the ring. When you think about the volume of players that play in the National Football League, it's a small amount who get to wear that hardware at some point of their career, year in and year out. And he was on a team that came so close to doing it. And he's decided, well, you know what? Most of this team is coming back.
Yeah.
And when you stack it up against what's going on in the NFC, our chances are very good of getting back there if we can stay healthy and if we continue to build on the things we did last year. So that's why I'm not surprised. The Slate thing was interesting because if you remember at one point, he tweeted out one day, well, it was, basically it was nice being here.
Yeah, it was like a goodbye. But he's very emotional, as we know.
And then the next day he's re-upped again.
Yeah.
But the fact that they kept both of those guys here, they needed that. They knew that. They needed the cornerstone of what they want to do as a defense. Brandon Graham coming back didn't surprise me. Brandon Graham told us on this show, he's told me a number of times, it's not about money for him. It's about being comfortable. It's about feeling wanted, which he was by this organization. And it's I just saw a quote of his not too long ago where he said if they wanted this year, he may have to ride off into the sunset. 35 years old, get 2 rings in his career. It's not a bad way to go out. Finish my career where I started it for a defensive lineman. That's a rarity in today's game.
Well, I think the other thing with BG is he has no problem with his role. Okay, I'm going to get X percentage of snaps. Yeah. I'm good. He has no problem. There's no ego there.
Less wear and tear on his body. He's fresher in December and into January. And if the team's winning, that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about. He's made his money. He's got 2 nice contracts in his career. So he's made his money. He's set.
And I can guarantee you, he's an awesome mentor for a Nolan Smith or whichever other young defensive lineman or anybody for that matter on either side of the ball. So he's the kind of guy you want around. He's a coach on the field. He's a model of how you go about your business and be a pro. You need to have some of those guys. And he's still productive. Guy had double-digit sacks last year. So he's still very productive. So that was big getting him back for sure. There's no doubt.
He's interesting. He's the kind of guy that goes out of his way to help those behind him.
Yeah.
Because people before him helped him along the way, not just with football, but how to handle yourself in adversity, how to deal with the Philadelphia market and the Philadelphia fan base. So he goes out of his way to do that. He's just gregarious by nature to begin with. But now he knows that this is the twilight of his career. His last hurrahs are coming up real quick, fast and furious.
Yep.
And he just wants to make sure that what he helped establish with his organization over his tenure continues long after he's gone.
Agreed. And he just gets it. He is everything. He is a model of what you want it to be.
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at the younger guys then, Gunner. Well, let me get hit with the running backs before I go there. DeAndre Swift and Penny, very talented in their own rights, but 2 guys who have missed a lot of time, in particular Penny. There was even some question for a minute if Penny was going to make this team. I didn't think there was much of a question there, but he makes it. He's more of the power guy. Swift is more finesse, space, home run hitter kind of guy. Let's go through it one more time, how you see them being incorporated. Is it just a matter of each guy is going to get a decent amount of touches per game? One guy's playing really well. You're going to ride the hot hand. How do you go about this thing, and how do you see them using these guys? And not to mention Gainwell and Scott.
Somebody's touches are going to suffer. It's going to be about matchups.
Yeah.
If they're playing a weaker defensive front, they're going to try to pound the ball with Penny and Gainwell between the tackles. If there's liabilities in pass coverage, whether it's from the linebackers to the safeties to the corners, you're going to see the backs getting the ball out of the backfield when it comes to matchups. And that's what Swift is there for. Because of the quartet and the different styles of running backs they have, the 2 guys who have injury histories, I believe you can keep them fresher and keep them more durable because you don't have to give them as many touches. Right. Now, when Swift obviously was in Detroit, he wasn't a focal point because they had other backs. They had Jamal Williams back there, who was their feature back. But when Swift was in a game, he was that home run hitter, whether it was on a delayed draw, swing pass, swing pass to the flats, quick curl over the middle, wheel routes down the sideline, whatever the case may be. That was his forte. And I expect to see that a lot of him in this particular offense. In Boston Scott is that Swiss Army knife. He can catch it. He can run it. He can block it. He can do so many different things for him. I think Scott will get the fewest touches overall out of the 4 backs, but I think with the other 3 in particular, because of their different styles, I think it's all going to come down to who we're facing down in distance. Yeah,
I think so too. And then keep the other thing that can hurt these guys maybe in some cases is, and it's a good thing for the Eagles, you have a quarterback who's so good at the quarterback sneak if you have short yardage, or if he's on the goal line, he's going to keep it himself because there's just less that has to happen. I mean, you don't have to hand the ball off. He takes the snap, he keeps it. he gets in there. Yeah, is there a little bit of a risk of an injury? Sure, there definitely is, but that may hurt some guys' touchdown totals. Whatever, I don't care. However the Eagles score, they score.
The bottom line is get the ball in the end zone.
Exactly.
How you do it? Get in the end zone.
All right, so let's look at this year's draft crop. Among them, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Tyler Steen, Sidney Brown. 4 guys. One's a D tackle, one's an edge, one is an offensive lineman, and one's a safety. Now, you're talking about a defensive tackle spot that has an opening because Javon Hargrave left. You're talking about an edge spot where the Eagles like to incorporate a rotation there, and we don't know quite where Smith will fall. Will he be ahead of Derek Barnett? I think he probably will, but you don't know. Tyler Steen, who probably won't get time unless there's injuries, but he has versatility to be able to play tackle or guard. And then Sidney Brown, there's very much an opportunity for him to get on the field at that safety spot. So let's hit these guys, and you tell me who you think makes the biggest contribution this year.
I would have to say Jalen Carter. I can't wait to see him shoot gaps, run down the field, run down the line of scrimmage laterally with his quickness, his ability to shed blockers with that swim move of his. I just think he's going to be a breath of fresh air in that defensive front. When he was arguably considered the best defensive player in the draft, along with the guy who Houston took, you got one of 2 premier defensive players, one of the top 2 premier defensive players. Okay. And if he's that good, I want to see him every down. We saw a small sample in the preseason, obviously, but that's nothing like what's going to come. And especially coming out of the gate, if New England's offensive line is that banged up, he has an opportunity to come out of the gate and set a tone for his season right from the very start. And I expect him to be a force in that defensive line for years to come with this team.
Yeah, I don't think there's any limitation. I don't think there's going to be any hesitation. Like they like to keep guys fresh, but I think early in the year, Jalen Carter, in terms of just snaps, it may be down a little bit just to sort of work up his stamina and get used to the NFL. Right. But I'm telling you, man, by the time we get to midway through or late in the season, you're going to have a hard time getting him off the field because he's going to be so good on both ends, whether it's the run, whether it's the pass. I think he's going to be that good. The only thing I worry about Nolan Smith is staying healthy. Is that arm all right? If the arm's all right, he's going to make an impact with his pass rush.
Yeah,
he is. He's too strong. He's got too many moves. He's too bendy, if you will, coming off that edge. I think he's going to be big. And I think week 5-ish, you're going to see Sidney Brown probably starting.
Week 5. Wow.
That's pretty early. I know. The only thing I would worry about is you're already really young out there with Reed Blankenship too. So maybe that plays into it a little bit, but I think he's going to make an impact. I do worry about one thing with him as well, and that's staying healthy. He's not the biggest guy in the world. No. And to his credit, he's not afraid to throw his body around. He will lay into you, man. And guys like that, sometimes I always reference Bob Sanders. I don't know if they're built for the super long haul. But I think he only has one gear, Derek. He can't play it any other way.
No, it's just how they harness that energy. Once he gets the technique down that they want him to get down, to use that speed and energy, he's going to be a tremendous asset. But when you start throwing your body around and you hit somebody the likes of a DK Metcalf or body, I've seen dudes, catch him blindsided, catch Metcalf blindsided and end up laying there on the ground because they got hurt more than DK did, and DK standing there looking at him like, you okay?
Yeah, right.
Now, there's not many receivers built like A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, but they're going to come across a few. But for the most part, I think once they get him to where they want him in terms of deciphering what he sees in front of them and still being as explosive as he is and continuously improving his tackling technique so that he's not hurting himself, they're not going to be able to keep him out of the lineup. Nolan Smith, I love how he can stand up a tackle off the edge and shed the blocker and get down the line of scrimmage, whether it's to the outside or the inside, and especially to the outside, and stretch a runner to keep him from turning up the field.
Yeah.
He's a little bit on the smaller side, but, man, he is strong. He is lightning fast, and he's going to be a nice compliment to Hassan Reddick on that outside.
He really is. And you just wonder will we ever see those guys on opposite sides, on the field at the same time? Is he strictly going to be a replacement to get, Hassan a break and all that? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like ultimately. I don't know what the role of Derek Barnett is going to be. We know he's back. We know they shopped him a little bit, but he's still here for sure. And then we mentioned Brandon Graham is still there. This should be a team. I've said before, I'll say it again, that in my opinion will be in the top 3 in sacks in the NFL. I think they're going to be that good. If you look at all the talent,
that's not overstating or a hype. They have the talent to do it. Plain and simple. They have the talent to do it. And the rotation, they're very big on their depth at the tackle spots and at the edge spots so that people are not overused. And by the fourth quarter, their guys are a lot fresher than the offensive lines they face.
Yep.
And so I agree with you. I expect them to be no worse, top 3 or 4 in quarterback sacks this year.
Keep in mind,
does that mean they get 70 sacks again? No. They could get 55 or 60 and still be at the forefront of the sack department.
Yeah, and that's a huge number. I would, if you told me right now that they're going to get 55, I'd say sign me up. I would take it in 2 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Derek and I mentioned off the top of the show, New England goes into this game already banged up at their offensive line. Riley Reif, their right tackle, out. We know that. Both guards are banged up a little bit right now. Hopefully, well, Belichick's not always the most forthcoming guy, but we'll see if we get any reports out of New England. But this should be a game where a team that we expect to be able to get sacks against a non-mobile quarterback should be able to do some things against Mac Jones. So we'll see. We'll see if they're able to pull that off. All right, we come back. We'll do a little hybrid here. We'll do a combo of the Phillies and continue with the Eagles discussion because at 1:30, we have Jeff McLean from the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's going to be joining us. We'll get a preview of the season from Jeff. We have our usual NFL segment coming up at 2 o'clock. I'll tell you about somebody in the media who was an OG insider who was stepping down, Derek. We'll get into that. A bunch of other stuff when we come back with the Phillies. Man, that was a white knuckle agita hang on for dear life. Like by your fingernails, you're on the cliff, like, please. Yeah, one of those deals last night. So we'll get into that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. That's Derek Gunn. I'm Rob Ellis. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I'm going to tell you right now about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because knowing who to trust with your finances can be a real challenge, can be really, really difficult. Well, I don't want you to have to go through the same things that I went through. I turned to Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, and it was the right move for me, and I've never looked back, and you won't either. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you might have a small business and need help with your employee benefits. That's another resource that Jim can help you with. Personally, I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and it was the best thing I could have done. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You could also email him, Murray, MURRAY.Jim@principal.com. That's Murray.Jim@principal.com.